Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Behavior Bros podcast presented by me, Fabian Cerna. I'm a board certified behavior analyst working in the Indianapolis area. I've been in the field for 5 years working with learners across the age and ability spectrum. For those of you who joined us last week, we discussed the importance of utilizing antecedent manipulations throughout a learner's therapy day. Today's discussion will build upon one of the most controversial topics debated within the field of applied behavior analysis, and that is punishment in regards to its ethical or unethical utilization as an effective intervention to change an individual's behavior. With us today is an assortment of individuals who differ with their stance on the topic, which has been influenced by the direct or indirect experiences and outcomes they have encountered with the use of punishment versus other less restrictive or reinforcement-based strategies. Guests, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourselves and provide a brief description of your stance in relation to the use of punishment.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Palmer, and I'm a special education teacher from Chicago, Illinois. I've been using ABA strategies in my kindergarten instructional classroom for the last 9 years, and I am pro-punishment as I've seen the positive effects it can have on addressing challenging behaviors in the educational setting. Throughout this debate, I will also be fielding some questions brought in from Fabian's listeners reaching out to us from Twitter.
Hi guys, my name is Laurel and I am the parent of a child on the autism spectrum. She was diagnosed at 3 and we have received ABA services for the last 9 years. I have seen the negative effects of these procedures and I'm here to discuss the need for less aversive methods.
Hello everyone, my name is Jasmine Steed and I am a childhood psychologist from Calumet City, Illinois. A significant amount of my research is on early childhood development, and I have seen a lot of the damaging effects that punishment procedures can have on children. I take the stance of being against punishment procedures.
Hi everyone, my name is Johanna Murillo and I am a social work counselor at a regional center. I am pro-punishment strategies as that I advocate for clients' preferences and interests when it comes to developing appropriate and effective interventions.
And hello, my name is Stephanie Woods, and I'm a behavior interventionist from El Centro, California. I work for an agency that provides ABA services to families and children on the spectrum, and I have worked in this field for 3 years, and I am against punishment.
Awesome. Well, hey, welcome everybody. So each one of my guests, as well as myself, will be participating in a live, relaxed debate surrounding the efficacy, ethical, and moral concerns of punishment and its necessity to create effective change in behavior. Now, let's take a deep breath. Before we get started with our discussion, I want to ensure that we are all on the same page when we use the term punishment. When we are talking about the term punishment, we are merely referring to any kind of stimulus change into one's environment. So we're either adding something or removing something, which once applied directly after a displayed behavior will aid in decreasing the future occurrence of that behavior, if it is a true punisher. So examples of punishment could be response cause, placing a child in a timeout, or even receiving a speeding ticket on the highway. So similar to the pictures we have posted on the slide of our PowerPoint, I do not want our audience to go into this discussion envisioning things like electroshock therapy or aversion therapy techniques when we say the term punishment. I want our audience to listen to all sides of this discussion with an open mind, clear of previously ingrained connotations, and decide for themselves how ethical or unethical the use of punishment may be related to applied behavior analysis. Jennifer, I would love to hear your thoughts on how ABA using punishment is evidence-based and ethical.
Thanks, Fabian. I would love to talk about that. As a classroom teacher, I'm working very closely with the BCBA in our school district to develop and implement different behavior change programs. Through her, I've really learned a lot about how the punishment can be incorporated into such programs to successfully reduce behaviors in the school setting. As a BCBA, Fabian, I'm sure you've heard that many people that are also BCBAs agree with using punishment. Actually, 500 members were surveyed by Read and Lovett, and they too prefer to use punishment procedures when working with their clients. First and foremost, the use of punishment in ABA is research-based. As behavior analysts per Code 1.01, of the Professional and Ethical Compliance Codes, assuring that something is scientifically proven is the first thing we have to consider when we are recommending behavior change programs. Many research-based studies have been conducted on the use of punishment, such as the one that took place with Piazzi and Hanley, as well as Griffin and Kurtz, and their studies included a range of clients. whom of which were male, female, differed in ages 2 through 18, participated in different educational experiences, had different socioeconomic backgrounds, and had varying diagnoses, including autism. In addition, throughout these studies, punishment techniques were trialed to address differing functions of behavior, such as attention, escape, and access to tangibles. These research-based studies have shown that punishment procedures are being referred to when reinforcement and other positive-based supports are not successful. Specifically, punishment is being used with the most challenging and severe behaviors, such as aggression towards others and self-injury. Examples of punishment procedures that were used in these two studies included planned ignoring, withdrawing preferred items, functional communication training, reinforcement schedule thinning, and physical redirection. I'm sure many of the members of the podcast today have used some of those strategies with their clients at one point or another. The use of punishment in ABA is not only research-based, but also very effective. In the Griffin and Kurtz trial, as shown in this visual, when presented with functional communication training, reinforcement procedures, and punishment techniques, it reduced 80% of problem behaviors for 100% of their clients. Whereas when reinforcement was used alone, it was only successful for 86% of their clients. Studies such as this have really shown that reinforcement combined with punishment techniques is the most effective strategy to refer to, because when punishment was used alone, it only decreased behaviors for 54% of the population. The only limitations to these studies would have to be that an adult population was not looked at. Lastly, when using punishment techniques in ABA, behavioral analyst's role is to still follow the professional and ethical compliance codes. As shown in my prior visual I have from WordPress.com, ethics discusses the rules and regulations that we are to follow as professionals, how to consider others' values, and how to conduct ourselves when working with others. Behavioral analysts are still following Code 3.01 and recommending behavior change programs that incorporate punishment based on a functional behavior assessment. They then are expected to follow Codes 4.02 and 4.04 and involve as well as receive consent from the client, stakeholders, family members, and any other parties involved in the decision-making process. Lastly, per Code 4.08, behavioral analysts are only going to recommend punishment procedures that they are considering and attempting after considering and attempting all positive behavioral support. When punishment is used, however, as mentioned in the studies I discussed before, it should be embedded with reinforcement. Like any other behavior change program, once consent is received, the behavioral analyst is going to appropriately train all the staff involved in the intervention, monitor its effectiveness, make any necessary modifications, and discontinue it per Code 411 if deemed necessary.
Awesome, Jennifer. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing.
No
You provide a
problem.
very extensive amount of information relaying how punishment procedures are research-based, effective, and truly rooted in the BACB professional and compliance codes. Great. I know you touched on a number of punishment procedures. However, we have Laurel here who wanted to share her thoughts as a parent on the use of restrictive punishment procedures and the amount of training and oversight that these practitioners are lacking.
Hi guys, it was mentioned earlier that Compliance Code 4.08 establishes the use of punishment only after every other available positive behavioral support has been attempted. What was not mentioned was that in Code 4.08, it also explicitly notes the need for staff to have undergone extensive training before implementing punishment procedures. CPI is considered the standard training for crisis prevention and the go-to for punishment procedures. They claim their intention is to educate on safety and security. However, watching the implementation of any of the top procedures, it's clear that the child's safety is not the main focus. These are some of the holds in my graphic that you learn in the training, things like the prone hold and the basket hold. One available online training costs roughly $100 for anyone involved and takes 3.5 hours to complete in order to get the certification. That's all. For the in-person training of the same company, Calm Every Storm, the cost is more than $2,000 per person, lasting 1 to 2 years until a refresher course is required. Crisis Prevention Institute has a 3 to 4 day seminar that trains people to become instructors in CPI, who then have 4 years before taking a 1-day refresher course. This is not enough time and couldn't possibly be complying with the standards laid out in Compliance Code 1.03, which states the necessity of maintaining competence through the professional development. My final point is this: punishment procedures are implemented incorrectly regardless of training. The current implementation of aversive procedures are not following the BICB ethical compliance code simply based off of what training is currently utilized. Based on a 2004 survey by Amanda B. Nickerson and Elizabeth Z., the majority of staff in schools are not trained in CPI. Due to this lack of punishment training, the use of less aversive procedures should be the only techniques employed. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. I'm sure I can speak for all of us. We enjoy listening to your viewpoint on such, highly used restrictive punishment procedures and the ethical concerns regarding the proper amount of training it takes to implement them, especially coming from you as a parent. I think we all can agree that such invasive procedures should come with high levels of training and oversight. Stephanie, I saw you nodding your head in agreement several times. It seems like you might have something to say.
Yeah, I do actually. I've actually been a part of CPI training as a RBT, and it's you're right, Laurel. It's not extensive training, and it does not prepare you to do the amount of holds or the amount of intervention, I guess, that they're wanting you to do on a client, and it really doesn't prepare you to do it when we're trying to do it in a real life scenario. It doesn't prepare you for when a client is throwing things at you or trying to get away from you, or, I just really have a hard time understanding CPI training as the way to go when we're not being trained necessarily the way that we're supposed to be.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Okay. All right, so after hearing these two opposing arguments, both being backed by extensive research, I want to take the time to open up our live Twitter to field any questions or comments regarding the information that my two guests just previously discussed.
Yeah, it looks like we're starting to get a few tweets in, Fabian. We actually have one from Joe out in Houston, Texas. His question is for me. Joe says, Jennifer, how would you explain the use of punishment to parents like Laurel who have concerns regarding these types of techniques? Well, as Laurel mentioned, there are many parents, especially I've worked with some in the school setting, that have concerns regarding punishment, especially if it involves physical intervention from staff. But following the BCBA Ethical Guidelines Code 2.05, I would educate the client and the family on punishment procedures and provide them with data and research to show how it's been successful with other clients. But I would only do this after we have attempted different reinforcement strategies, and I would show them the baseline that just has not been effective for their child. If parents agreed with the use of punishment, we would then schedule to meet in the future to review the plan and progress being made per Code 3.0 when we would assess how the behaviors are changing.
Thanks, Jennifer. Great response, Joe. I hope that has addressed any of your questions or concerns that you brought forward. We're going to move and switch gears a little bit. We have Johanna here, who is a social worker in the field. Why don't you please share your thoughts on the use of punishment in ABA?
Okay, so then I would like to focus on the importance of when developing an intervention for it to be client-centered. So when developing a behavior contract or intervention, allowing the client to participate in the design of the contract may increase the power of the intervention by giving them a sense of responsibility and control. Just like the code 4.02 states, involving clients in planning and consent will definitely, give more effectiveness towards the intervention. Also, I want to give my insight as how punishment has been more acceptable in society because of the perception that it does not threaten the individual's autonomy. And that is stated in one of the core ethical principles, as in respecting autonomy of the client, which is promoting his or her independence or self-sufficiency. So just the fact that client knowing that he or she has the right to be part of the intervention development brings more self-satisfaction, as he or she knows that the team care about his well-being. Having this said, behavior analysts have a responsibility to operate in the best interest of clients, which is also one of our Code of Ethics 2.02. If clients are given the right to speak up for themselves, then we are abiding to the Code of Ethics. Also, if we want to address, the nonverbal population, it may be more reasonable for friends, relatives, and advocates to be informed about the process or selecting, behavior interventions that are most appropriate and are person-centered. Just like that visual that's presented there, we do have to, be focused on the whole of the person, which is, the abilities, the skills, the interest of the client, and so on. So clients have the right to have access to effective treatment. If so, teams should inform the client about the effects of the treatment, side effects, and how will this benefit him or her. Through the selection of interventions, clients' parents are informed about the risks and side effects of the intervention. So they are clearly described to the parent as what the client might undergo through. This is operating ethically, as client is given the preference of selecting by the use of a communication device when they're nonverbal in order to be informed about his or her treatment. Clients should be provided with communication devices at all times in order for them to be aware of what's going on and also be informed about the description of the behavior change program objectives. Lastly, I want to address social validity, which is based on the goals, the procedures, and interventions. All of that needs to be socially acceptable to the client, the behavior analyst, and the parent, which is acceptability. Clients will want faster and effective results in order for them to feel more integrated in their school, community, and relationships, which sometimes with punishment, we will get faster results. And based on the small amount of research on the stance of punishment among professionals who work with individuals with disabilities, they have concluded that punishment procedures are rated on 4 dimensions, which is restrictiveness, intrusiveness, acceptability, and efficacy. Teachers' perspective of efficacy of punishment is closely related to acceptability.
Very, very interesting talking points you brought up there, Johanna, regarding the ethical use of punishment involving the client in their own intervention development. This is something that we can have clients who are able to be involved in designing an intervention for themselves, and sometimes they may indeed advocate for a punishment procedure for themselves. So very interesting concepts to bring up.
Exactly.
You know what, Johanna, I actually have looked at some of that research, and the procedures are new to me, but I can definitely see the benefits. I would like to know more about these newer programs that potentially use punishment procedures in a client-centered way. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. I like how these opposing arguments are, finding some common ground here. I can't wait to hear the rest of our discussion. So now we have Jasmine up. She's an early childhood psychologist in the public school system. Why don't you go ahead and give us your viewpoint on the use of punishment in ABA, Jasmine?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I would first like to start off and say what an honor it is for me to be here today. It is always amazing when you're able to get together and sit openly and talk about conversations like this.
Yes.
As was stated during the introductions, my stance against punishment stems from counseling elementary school students. Some of my students have received punishment procedures in the classroom and at home. While these procedures are not physical in nature, they still have posed some concerns about the psychological effects. While I do appreciate that clients have the ability to be involved with the care that they receive, as Johanna pointed out, I still believe that it is important that the psychological effects be talked about. The main experience that a child can have while receiving punishment procedures is isolation. According to a research article by Catherine Martellini, when punishment procedures such as timeout are exhibited, it teaches children that when they show undesirable behavior, they will be isolated. One example that can be illustrated that I will actually draw your attention to is the picture of the boy listed here, where you see he's outside of the classroom while classroom instruction is going on. School settings should strive to provide a therapeutic environment that promotes learning. Punishment procedures such as timeout changes the environment from a focus on learning. Individuals are taken away from receiving human interaction for a specific amount of time. Without human interactions, this may allow children to feel like they're outcasts. These punishment procedures also do not teach the child the appropriate way to correct the behavior. A child may become fixated on that behavior and not fully understand ways to rectify the undesirable behavior. Another point that I would also like to talk about is that punishment procedures can also make clients feel self-conscious. An article by Mary Lamia discusses how punishments may lead an individual to developing a negative self-concept. This specific study may have had an limitation, considering that the study was only conducted with multiple groups of clients. Punishment procedures may make individuals feel as if there is an issue with themselves instead of the behavior. When working with individuals with disabilities, it is important that you strive to encourage them to know that they can do anything that they put their minds to. These individuals may begin to let their unwanted behaviors define them. The punishment procedures may then have the potential to be viewed as a reminder of any inadequacies that they feel within themselves. I would also like to point out that it's important to take into consideration the BACB code of 409. It is important to analyze the possible restrictions that punishment procedures can impose. Individuals should have access to the least restrictive environments. Punishment procedures alter that environment, and it's not natural. In my personal experience, talking with elementary schools, teachers, they have benefited from having their students be in environments that do not take away these restrictions. Their students were able to control these unwanted behaviors without placing students in environments that restricted their interactions with others.
Okay, Jasmine. Jennifer, do we have any questions coming in about what Johanna and Jasmine just talked about? I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. How can punishment be client-centered for some, yet having others feeling isolated?
Yeah, let's see if anyone's asking specifically about that. Oh, we have Karen out in New York. Her question is for Johanna. She says, I agree with Johanna that social validity needs to be considered when recommending behavior change programs. Some punishment procedures, such as timeouts, however, can be considered isolating and restrictive. Johanna, how do you argue that these procedures are still socially acceptable?
Okay, so mainly timeouts have been implemented universally with or without knowing the methodology behind it. So unconsciously, sometimes we implement it, So parents and teachers and caregivers have implemented in children as they probably were brought up the same way. So timeouts have developed to be socially acceptable as it has been effective for them. Based on the Code of Ethics 4.08, consideration of this strategy is to always include reinforcement procedures for the alternative behavior. If that does not occur, or there's no change in the wanted behavior that we want to see, then it is recommended to implement, timeout and other punishment procedures. As we all have, we end up providing the child with a reinforcer in order for us to obtain the wanted behavior after the punishment strategy has been implemented.
Thank you for your answer, Joanna. I hope that helps you out there, Karen.
Fabian, I'm interested as a BCBA. What are your thoughts on the use of punishment in ABA?
Great question. I've been itching to share my thoughts on it, so I'm just going to go for it. Don't mind me if I get too hyped up, because I tend to be very passionate about my viewpoints on this.
It is your podcast. You go for it. Yeah.
So I'm just going to say I'm a supporter of resources that state the use of punishment in ABA is a warning component of an intervention. When individuals are displaying the behaviors that are zero tolerant. When I use this term zero tolerant, I mean that these are behaviors that, when engaged in, are displayed. They significantly increase the likelihood of that individual causing harm to themselves, others, or the environment. These are behaviors like displaying aggression towards others, eloping into streets, property destruction, or using their body or physical surface to engage in topographies of self-injurious behavior. A 2005 research article by Doty, Poe, and Anderson actually stated that self-injurious behavior, severe aggression, and property destruction are among the most challenging behaviors exhibited by individuals with developmental disabilities. And when displayed, these challenging behaviors and topographies can adversely impact an individual's learning, independent functioning, and can interfere with developing more age-appropriate behavior. And if severe, these behaviors can threaten the health and safety of the individual and or the people who interact with the individual. So we're talking their peers, their family, practitioners implementing treatment plans, strangers in the community. I know Jasmine previously touched on children having these feelings of isolation and negative self-concepts while being subjected to the use of punishment procedures. But I want to put us in a similar mind frame of how these feelings of isolation can be cultivated from a different aspect. These can be cultivated from families and caregivers, and even schools homebounding children because their topographies of problem behavior are just too severe. They're erratic, they're unpredictable. Individuals are limited to walls of their homes every single day because families and school systems are either not equipped to combat such severe problem behaviors and or do not want to chance anyone's health and safety by taking them out in the environment. I see it all the time. Families are constantly leaving their child with autism at home while they go on a vacation in Florida because they just do not want to risk anything. And then on the other side, schools are suspending students with identified IEPs. These kids have IEPs and they're being suspended because they're engaging in aggression and property destruction because, once again, these schools are not equipped to combat those behaviors. BAC Professional Compliance Code 4.03a states that behavior analysts must tailor behavior change programs to the unique behaviors, environmental variables, assessment results, and goals of each client. When it comes to zero-tolerant behaviors, a 2005 article by Hastings and Moon states that there may be situations that arise in which one could argue that the first goal of client treatment is to reduce the risk of self-injury, thus it being ethical to use a restrictive procedure. Brett Nevoe, who is a BCBA and CEO of the largest consulting group on the East Coast, was quoted as saying, "Sometimes punishment of life-threatening behaviors is the most ethical and responsible action to take." So let's talk about a scenario real quick, right? You're walking with your child. They elope from you heading towards a busy street of oncoming traffic. Wow, you freak out, right? What do? You grab them, you wrap your arms around them tight to stop them, right? That's what I would do. That's what you would do.
Yeah.
Right? So you have just placed your child into a restrictive hold. Is your mind racing towards the unwanted possible side effects of that hold, or are you just relieved that your child is safe? These are the factors that we have to consider when we talk about the use of punishment-based procedures. Even if unpleasant reactions arise from the child or adverse side effects appear, it does not mean that the punisher did not work. The main point is, have we decreased the likelihood of that behavior occurring again in the future? We need to get away from the misconception that punishment is always good and reinforcement is always, that punishment is always bad and reinforcement is always good. BAC Compliance Code 4.08c states that before implementing punishment-based procedures, behavior analysts ensure that appropriate steps have been taken to implement reinforcement-based procedures unless the severity or dangerousness of the behavior necessitates immediate use of aversive procedures. And when I say aversive procedures, these are things like the use of protective equipment like helmets or arm guards, or the use of restrictive holds. These aren't things in the extreme end, such as electroshock therapy. BAC and Professional Compliance Code 2.098 states that clients have the right to effective treatment. Dr. Christopher Manatee, a BCBA at Brett Denovy and Associates, which is the largest award-winning behavioral consultation group on the East Coast, was quoted as saying, "Practitioners have an obligation to look at all treatment options and choose the most effective one for that client based on data, literature, and ethics. It's not the punishment itself that is unethical, it's when people don't do the proper assessment." A 2008 research article by Mahatmya, Zobel, and Baldovino states that by conducting functional assessments, it allows for identification of the relations between problem behaviors and relevant antecedents and consequences on an individual result. And I quote, "The results of these assessments subsequently guide the process of selecting appropriate and functionally relevant treatment." 2005 research study conducted by Hanley et al. Stated that functional analysis tend to set the occasion for a focus on positive behavioral interventions, which works for a variety of behavior disorders. But component evaluations have shown that they may not be effective for all. The results of this study concluded that positive behavioral interventions were not satisfactory enough in reducing problem behavior. It was not until punishment contingencies were added to function-based treatments that problem behaviors were reduced to near zero rates, and alternative responses were maintained. We need to keep in mind that when we are talking about the effectiveness of a treatment, we need to realize that it's not solely about behaviors, increasing some or decreasing some. We need these behaviors to increase or decrease to appropriate levels, acceptable levels. If treatment options are restricted to only those considered to be non-aversive or positive, then clients may be receiving treatment that is ineffective and perhaps unpreferred. As we heard Johanna saying that some clients prefer punishment in their interventions. So I want to bring you through one more scenario. Okay, let's say one of your family members is diagnosed with cancer, right? Horrible, awful. The suggested treatment is typically chemotherapy. Let's consider this a form of positive punishment. It's adding a stimulus to reduce cancer cells from behaving in a certain manner, in which chemotherapy is a highly intrusive procedure that comes with the potential for a whole host of negative side effects. But if the cancer is severe enough, or the behavior is severe enough, it warrants this type of treatment and is considered ethical and appropriate in this manner. We hardly ever see medical doctors being labeled as unethical when they prescribe this type of invasive treatment, because they have typically conducted proper assessments and see it fit as being the most effective intervention, just as behavior analysts do regarding the clients on their caseloads. Whew. That's my viewpoint.
Wow, Fabian, it seems like you do have a lot to say on this topic. And I actually want to point out that scenario that you brought up. I think you made a really good point in stating, that the parent did do what they needed to do at that point. And yes, it might have made them get that child in a hold. But I think, like you said, a quote like, I wrote it down. You said, sometimes punishment of life-threatening behaviors is the most ethical and responsible action to take. And I think you're right. I think you did a great job in stating, even Ethic Code 4.08, which, stated that you need to use that that type of action if the severity or dangerousness of the behavior necessitates immediate use of aversive procedures. Which in a sense kind of is making me feel a little boggled because I'm on the opposite end. But
that's what the debate's about, right?
Yeah. But for my point, like I said, I am against punishment. And just based on, according to the Department of Health and Human Services Restrictive Intervention Guidelines of 2012, an aversive strategy or treatment intervention is described as a practice that uses unpleasant physical or sensory stimuli in an attempt to reduce undesired behavior, and usually cannot be avoided or escaped, or is pain-inducing. Also, it refers to any withholding of basic human rights or needs of a person's goods, belongings, or favored activity for the purpose of the behavior management control. What really got me thinking while reading this guideline is the fact that I've seen behavior analysts and RBTs or even parents teaching strategies that do just this. They will withhold basic human rights or needs of an individual in order to teach or modify their behavior. We all have that need for community, for social interaction, and timeouts do the exact opposite of that, as Jasmine was stating earlier. I have also seen it to where individuals will have preferred items removed, such as their favorite food, in order to get them to act the way others want them to act or behave. When using these types of interventions on the clients we work with, we begin to be in violation of Ethic Code 7.02, which states that a behavior analyst is to take the necessary action to protect the client when their rights are being violated or where there's potential for harm. The use of punishment sometimes is just downright degrades and damages our children. It's already enough that in our school systems, they may be getting bullied or constantly hurt by other children. And the last thing that they need is somebody who they see as secure, such as parents or teachers or staff members, to add to that damage that society is already bringing into their lives. When we put our children in timeouts, use physical restraints, and remove preferred objects, we're in violation of BACB Code of Ethics Code 7.02 by not protecting their rights. We are to protect when there is potential for harm. We've heard the negative effects of timeouts, and as they create a sense of isolation and sometimes lead individuals to believe that they're unwanted, unloved, or even a burden. Why not instead approach the situation with compassion and with love and just try to understand the function of the behavior, which is as behavior analysts are supposed to be doing. We should try to understand what is causing little Johnny or little Joey to act the way that they're acting, and to do that, we are supposed to, as behavior analysts, just protect them and really try to find out the root of the cause or the root of the situation, the behavior. When we fail to do that, the client will just move on to a different inappropriate behavior that may be identical in providing the reinforcement they're seeking.
Yes, I can agree to that last statement, Stefan. I'm pro punishment, right? But I can definitely agree with, when we don't discover the root cause and we punish a behavior, that learner might just stop doing that behavior, but engage in another one within their response class, right? Because it's still going to give them access to that reinforcement, as you said.
Right.
Let's see. Do we have any more questions coming in from Twitter, Jennifer?
Yeah, your feed is really blowing up right now, Fabian. Let's see. This is like way more popular than last week's topic for sure. Our first one is from Nick out in Indiana. His question is for you. He says, Fabian, I feel like I'm regularly yelling at my child because I think this form of punishment decreases his problem behaviors. My question is, am I overusing this form of punishment? And if so, how should I fade it out?
Great question, Nick. I want to applaud you for being vulnerable enough to share your question, and shout out to Indiana. Something we have to be cautious with regarding punishment-based strategies is ensuring that the intent of utilizing positive or negative punishment procedures is aimed at decreasing a child's problem behavior, such as defective requests for our attention, rather than it being to negatively reinforce ourselves, the punisher. Because in a sense, our behavior as a punisher may be reinforcing to us because, let's say, their annoying behavior is being reduced when we yell at them. So I would take a step back and do a little bit of behavior analyzing on your own. Maybe reach out to some kind of consultant to find out why your child is engaging in this problem behavior, and then providing them with an appropriate replacement behavior.
That was, I think, a great response, Fabian. We got some more questions coming in. Our next question is from Landon out in Wisconsin. His question is for me. He says, Jennifer, if punishment procedures are not working for a client, would you immediately decide to discontinue it? And how would you resolve this issue? I know Stephanie mentioned earlier that isolation is the worst feeling that any learner could have, and that happens from punishment. I wouldn't discontinue punishment right away because the student might be feeling just as isolated because of their behaviors. Maybe they're not able to access their peers and socialize with other people because their behaviors are inhibiting that. So instead, I would first check that the punishment procedure is being implemented with fidelity, and then I would review the protocols per Code 4.07 and ensure that there are no environmental variables affecting the implementation of the plan. And if it was determined with data, however, that progress was still not being made, I would then complete some more research on other strategies to recommend a more appropriate plan for the learner that was still the least restrictive per Code 4.09. I hope that answers your question, Landon, but we do have another question coming in from Stacy out in Georgia. Her question is for our behavior interventionist, Stephanie. Stacy says, Stephanie, if reinforcement systems and other positive supports are not causing a decrease in behaviors, would you then consider using punishment?
Stephanie, I think is your mic turned on? You got to put your mouth on the mic, and the podcast listeners can hear us.
Sorry.
I thought we lost her for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're back.
All right, here I am, guys. So I think based off Ethic Code 4.08, and I think Fabian touched on this as well, I mentioned it earlier, regarding the use of punishment procedures, behavior analysts recommend reinforcement rather than punishment. And if punishment procedures are used, we must ensure that aversive procedures are accompanied by an increased level of training, supervision, and oversight. Kind of how we talked about the CPI training earlier. The behavior analysts are to evaluate the effectiveness of the aversive procedure in a timely manner and modify the behavior change program if it's ineffective. So I guess answer to your question. This is tough because I know we're speaking against punishment and we're seeing the negative effects of it, but I think that punishment could potentially be used as a last resort. Sorry, team.
Okay, common ground. Here we go. Nice. See? This debate ended up being, as we planned, a very nice, relaxed discussion where we're able to see, everyone's viewpoint from a different angle, because we are providing research and facts and things that people before us have done. We're not just pulling our opinions out of thin air, So I think this has been a very well-rounded discussion, I think. What do you guys think?
Definitely.
I agree. It's been very informative.
Yes, very.
Cool. I know the Twitter is still blowing up with questions, Jennifer, but I think that's all the time we have for questions for this podcast. I want to wrap us up here by summarizing for our listeners what we have found common ground on and what still might be up for debate in the future for another podcast. So,
what does everyone feel like we're agreeing on? I feel like we really have kind of found some common ground.
Yeah, I'm going to say that we can all agree on that there is research on some punishment procedures that are just based in scientific research, and that it's proven that these can have effects on decreasing problem behaviors. Especially for those zero tolerant ones that I touched on in my little spiel.
Yes,
definitely. Yeah.
Definitely.
What do you think we disagree on still that we could still have possible debates on in the future?
Well, one thing that I still think that we haven't found common ground on is the negative effects that punishment can have on a lot of the clients that are receiving them. While we are saying that we are abstaining from the more physical forms of punishment, there still are some psychological effects that should kind of be discussed more and talked about, and we should also try to strive for ways in the future on how to combat those psychological effects from happening.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. I definitely enjoyed your viewpoint and your feedback on giving us those real life situations, those kids in the classroom, and what those side effects can be, and what they can be now in the present, and what they turn into in the future.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And putting aside, I guess, the negative effects that Jasmine brought up and that I brought up as well, I think we can kind of all agree that punishment procedures could be used as a last resort, unless it jeopardizes with their immediate health and safety of them and those around them. I think punishment, if used correctly and with extensive proper training, could potentially be used as a last resort.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I agree.
And we would all, like you're saying, Stephanie, we would still always do reinforcement first as the first, attempt. So I think, we're all in agreement on that.
Exactly. I definitely think though, still, behavior analysts, we definitely are going to abide by the ethical guidelines and, use reinforcement-based procedures first. But then we have to make those split-second decisions where clients are, let's say they're, sorry for being so graphic, but say they're gouging their eyes out. What are those, when those kind of, intense scenarios, we have to balance between, what is ethical. And the point I brought up in my talk, the first goal of client treatment may be reducing those self-injurious or, negative behaviors sometimes. And we have to decide very quickly, if, how long is too long to implement a reinforcement-based procedure before we decide, okay, punishment is ethical enough to use here.
Yes.
Okay. And I would also like to say, in regards to Joanna's, the research she mentioned, I definitely think punishment can't always be client-centered because some clients can't advocate for themselves. But the research she mentioned is important, and I'd like to learn more about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely think we kind of disagree on.
Okay, and then something that I agree on was on the getting the proper and continuous training for how for us to be competent in how to implement the punishment procedures, because sometimes we cannot take it seriously or we don't see the seriousness of it. But as RBTs or professionals, we really have to be trained on this in order to how can I say, be ethically driven, in our environment.
You're still getting calls, Fabian.
Oh man, it's like,
They're
told
still
the
coming in.
listeners. Yeah, I told the listeners they
Yeah.
gotta. We had enough. We don't have enough time for all this.
I know.
Listener, please send out another tweet or an email, and we'd definitely be happy to respond to those messages at a later date. But yes, thank you, Joan. I think we all can definitely agree. You know, we all were shaking our heads when Laurel was discussing, you know, that need for proper and continuous treatment, especially regarding those very invasive, you know, holds that sometimes are indeed warranted, you know, to kind of handle and relax a learner when they're engaging in high magnitude like carpet destruction and aggression. But once again, those trainings do not put us in those real life scenarios of what we actually face. And sometimes, you know, practitioners are just ad-libbing in a sense of what to do and how to hold those learners, and you know, those definitely can blur the lines between ethical and non-ethical. So I just want to thank all my guests for taking the time to join us today. I think we had a very, you know, beneficial, enlightening conversation here. It's very interesting to hear this group of professionals' experiences and thoughts on the use of punishment in ABA. I really enjoyed learning from one another as well as hearing from all our listeners. I hope that my listeners found this podcast to be informative. If you would like to check out any of the resources that we referred to today throughout this podcast, please check out the following websites for more information. And be tuned to turn into next week's podcast, where we'll be discussing the importance of treatment fidelity regarding reinforcement and punish-based interventions. See you guys next time.
Bye. Having us.
Bye.